Hey, everybody, welcome back to Reason and Theology. Your host, Michael. On a Tuesday, I want to talk about a couple articles that just came out on the situation with Traditionis Custodes and Pope Francis, specifically Pope Francis confirming Cardinal Roche on Traditionis Custodes. If you're not familiar with this, fret not. I'm going to give a very brief overview before we dive in, but I do want to first remind you, hit that subscribe button. Please help this channel grow. So if you aren't subscribed already, hit the subscribe button, then the bell for notification. And by the way, the show is also in part sponsored by realestateforlife.org. If you want to buy a home or sell a home and you want to support the pro-life movement, realestateforlife.org. Be sure to check them out. So long story short, Traditionis Custodes was issued a few years ago by Pope Francis, where he began to restrict what's erroneously called the Latin Mass, but more properly called the Missal of 1962 of John the 23rd. Again, some people also erroneously call it the Tridentine Latin Mass. There's various titles for it. But he began to restrict it. And of course, a major storm came about from this document. And there was a clause in canon law that quite a few bishops exploited, where they felt that they could still offer the Missal of 62 in parishes contra Traditionis Custodes because of a certain clause in canon law. And then the question was, well, okay, is that a proper interpretation of canon law? Well, Cardinal Roche, who is over the Congregation for Divine Worship, or now the Dicastery for Divine Worship, he was weighing against that and saying that no, bishops actually have to run those exceptions by Rome first for approval. And some people felt, okay, well, Cardinal here, the Cardinal Roche is just overstepping his bounds. He's going beyond his authority whenever he does this. Well, it turns out that that is not the case. He was not transgressing his authority. It wasn't ultra vires or anything like that. He actually had the authority to rein in some of this stuff, for better or for worse. We're going to read the article together. I'm first going to take a look at one from NCR Online, the National Catholic Reporter, and then I want to read where Peter is, because Mike Lewis has some additional insights on this. And by the way, he will be coming on the show on Friday to talk about his insider perspective on this question and also offer his commentary. So look for that Friday evening. Okay, so for the NCR Online article, which is the one that was sent to me, somebody sent this to me and said, hey, you need to check this out immediately. So I opened up my email this morning and read this article. It says Pope Francis on February 21st reaffirmed that the Vatican's worship office has been given full authority to limit the celebration of the pre-Vatican II Latin Mass, and what may be seen as a major blow to some U.S. bishops seeking to circumvent the office's decision on the matter. So whether we like it or not, the Holy Father himself has confirmed that the DDW does actually have the authority to say, hey, no, you need to run this by Rome first. In a brief rescript published in the Daily Bulletin, the Vatican reiterated that the Dicastery for Divine Worship and Discipline of the Sacraments was first given the authority to reimpose restrictions on the Latin Mass in the Pope's July 2021 law, Traditionis Custodes, which was later reconfirmed in December of 2021 when the Vatican published a response or dubia on how the new law was to be applied. In his original July 2021 law, Francis declared that approved groups who use the traditional Latin Mass can no longer use regular parishes for their masses, and that instead bishops must find an alternative location for them subject to the Vatican's approval. And let me just stop there. Some people are wondering, why did he even do this? Again, to kind of reiterate, although I've done shows fully devoted to the question of Traditionis Custodes, but just to recap, one of the concerns that Pope Francis has is not with the Latin Mass itself, as it's again erroneously called, the Missal of 62, um, the concern isn't so much with that as much as it is how it has become weaponized and people are using it to dissent from the magisterium. That's what Pope Francis himself says whenever he issued Traditionis Custodes. That's the main reason for why he issued it. Now, I think that we can say, even though we can certainly say, I understand that's a legitimate concern, and that group of people who are weaponizing the Missal of 62 certainly need to be disciplined and reined in. However, was this the best approach? That's where I think that we can offer um, some constructive criticism of the Holy See's disciplinary decision here. I think we can question whether or not that has been the best approach to deal with a legitimate problem, because there are some people who do not weaponize the Missal of 62 and find it very beneficial, and yet they have to suffer because of others. So is there maybe a better way to handle this? I'm of the opinion that perhaps there is a better way to handle this. So I understand where Pope Francis is coming with Traditionis Custodes. It's certainly within his authority, but just from where I stand, it seems like, there's some people who are impacted by this decision that really don't deserve to be impacted. And that legitimate concern of Pope Francis can be addressed through other measures. But that's just my opinion. That's my Canon 212 constructive criticism, if you will. But ultimately, it's up to the Holy Father to determine these things. All right, moving forward. In recent months, however, a number of U.S. bishops have cited a provision from the Church's Code of Canon Law, arguing that it allows for local bishops to offer a dispensation when deemed necessary for the good of their diocese. The Pope's latest clarification reiterates that such decisions must be approved by the Vatican's worship office. So, the bishops who are citing this exception from canon law, the Pope is saying, no, you actually need to run that through the DDW instead of just taking it on your own authority to do. And it continues, among the U.S. bishops who have offered such dispensations to Traditionis Custodes, Archbishop Samuel Aquila of Denver, Archbishop Alexander Sample of Portland, Oregon, and Bishop Thomas Paprocki of Springfield, Illinois, who is also chairman-elect of the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Canonical Affairs and Church Governance. Some canon lawyers, notably the editors of the website The Pillar, have also claimed that Cardinal Arthur Roche, head of the Vatican's worship office, had overstepped his authority in reining in bishops seeking to offer dispensations. So some are saying, look, Roche doesn't have this authority to say that you got to run it by the DDW. So turns out they were wrong. In response to those claims, Roche told the Catholic website Where Peter Is, specifically Mike Lewis, that such claims were an attack on the Pope's authority, which he added for Catholics is an astonishing act of full hubris. And again, I'm going to have Mike Lewis on Friday evening, and he's going to kind of give us the insider baseball and his commentary on this question, because it was Roche who responded directly to Mike Lewis on the question. The new rescript, which comes after the Pope met with Roche on February 20th, yesterday, underscores not only that Roche's office had full authority in such cases, but that if a diocesan bishop has granted dispensations for a parish church to be used for the Latin Mass or for priests ordained after July 2021 to celebrate it, that they're obliged to inform Roche's office, which will assess those matters on a case-by-case basis. So those decisions that have already been made still need to run them through the DDW. Since restrictions were first imposed on the celebration of the Latin Mass in 2021, Roche argued that the new norms have the sole purpose of preserving the gift of ecclesial communion with Pope. So again, the intention is, again, rein in those who are weaponizing the Missal of 62. And look, that's a good thing. We need that. But is this the best way to do it, is the question. Surely there are other ways to rein in people who are fomenting schism and weaponizing the Missal of 62 without punishing people who aren't weaponizing the Missal of 62, but just merely prefer it and benefit from it and want to enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the same for me. I prefer the Byzantine liturgy. Some people might prefer the Missal of 62. That's fine. Nothing wrong with it, as long as you're not weaponizing it against the church. Now, if somebody were to come along and start using the Divine Liturgy of Chrysostom to put down Latin Catholics and say that you Latin Catholics are evil and you silly Latin Catholics, you're not chrismating infants, what you're doing is sinful. How dare you not chrismate infants? And if they started taking the tradition of the East and weaponizing it against brothers in Christ, that would become a problem, even though there's nothing wrong with the Eastern tradition here. And one might even say, well, this particular expression is more ideal than this other one. Sure, but that's different than weaponizing it and using it against fellow brothers in Christ, which again, unfortunately, some people are doing. So that's where the Holy Father is coming from. I totally get it. I understand the motives are good, but I just want to say, I think there's a better way to deal with those who are fomenting schism and weaponizing the Missal of 62 without resorting to these measures. But again, that's my opinion. However, I do recognize Pope Francis does have the authority to restrict the Missal of 62. He could entirely discontinue it according to the Council of Trent and the First Vatican Council and Pius the 12th, as I've demonstrated elsewhere. Again, I'll put that in the show notes. The Pope does have the authority to do this. Question is should he use that authority in this situation? That's kind of where the debate is. In August 2022 interview with NCR, Roche told or said he believes much of the resistance to Francis, as has been expressed by a number of Latin Mass adherents, is rooted in opposition to the reforms of the Second Vatican Council. Again, which is in part true for those who are weaponizing it, but obviously that's not true of everybody who prefers the Missal of 62. It continues, which included the approval of the translation of the liturgy into the vernacular in an effort to make the Mass more accessible and involve greater participation of the laity. Reforms of the liturgy was an enormous long preparation prior to the council, and the council is the highest legislation that exists in the church, Roche said. Once that legislation comes into effect, it's a very serious matter. You disregard that and you're really putting yourself sideways towards the edges of the church, he added. I agree with Roche here, but here's some pushback that I would offer respectfully for Cardinal Roche here. I agree with what he's saying in substance. Look, if you're going against an ecumenical council, yeah, that's a serious issue. You're already on the fringe of the church, and that could eventually turn into schism if you start outright rejecting it, or some other things. But here's where I would also offer a little bit of pushback to Cardinal Roche on that point. It's true, however, some of the reforms that came in the post-conciliar church were not the result of the Second Vatican Council. They were later efforts of the Roman Pontiff. So I can say that some of the reforms that we have in the post-conciliar era are not directly because of the Second Vatican Council, but are because of papal initiative. Now, does the Holy Father have the authority to implement some of these reforms? Of course he does. Of course. Even if the Second Vatican Council did not call for them, the Pope on his own initiative has that authority. So I want to say at the end of the day, I wouldn't appeal to the Second Vatican Council to say, there's legislation here enabling all this. I wouldn't appeal to the Second Vatican Council. I would just simply point to papal authority, because the Second Vatican Council in part could be appealed to, but not entirely, when it comes to some of the reforms of the liturgical expression in the post-conciliar church. It just depends on what specifically we're referring to. Some things were carried out from the Second Vatican Council. Some things did go beyond what the Second Vatican Council came for. Again, with the authority of the Holy Father, and he does have that authority to do so. The Holy Father can, on his own initiative, without the consent of an ecumenical council, implement liturgical reforms in the Roman Rite. He certainly has that authority. So I would just rephrase this and say, aside from the council being the highest legislation in the church, the Holy Father is also equally the highest legislation in the church. Because when we speak of an ecumenical council, we're talking about the College of Bishops in union with the Holy Father, never acting apart from it. So we can speak of an ecumenical council as the highest legislation in the church because we're already assuming it's in union and acting with cum petro et sub petro. But we could also say, not only does a council, as long as it's acting with Peter and under Peter, is it the highest expression in the church, we can also speak of the Pope acting alone. as exercising that high expression. We especially see that in the instance of papal infallibility, but that also applies to disciplinary matters, which, according again to Trent, Vatican I, and other instances, the Pope also has that authority, even outside of the act of an ecumenical council. So I agree in theory with what Roche is saying here, but I would just slightly qualify it a little bit, because some people are going to get the impression that maybe the Second Vatican Council called for all of the post-conciliar liturgical reforms, and that's not necessarily the case. However, the vast majority of the bishops who were at the Second Vatican Council did go along with what the Pope eventually implemented after the council. Okay, so let's now look at where Peter is article. Pope confirms Cardinal Roche on Traditionis Custodes. Today at noon in Rome, the Vatican Press Office published a rescript confirming that dispensations from July 16, 2021, motu proprio Traditionis Custodes, are reserved to the Apostolic See. The document, published in Italian and signed by Cardinal Arthur Roche, the prefect of the Dicastery for the Divine Worship and Discipline of the Sacraments, was approved by the Pope during a private audience with Cardinal Roche yesterday, February 20th. A rescript defined by Canon 59, paragraph 1 in the Code of Canon Laws, an administrative act that grants a privilege, dispensation, or other favor at someone's request. This rescript provides papal confirmation that dispensations from the Articles of Traditionis Custodes prohibiting the use of parish churches and the erection of personal parishes for the celebration of the Mass according to the 62 Missal, and granting permission for priests ordained after July 16, 2021 to celebrate the older form of the Mass are reserved in a special way to the Apostolic See. Additionally, bishops who have already issued dispensations without consulting the DDW must notify the Dicastery as soon as possible regarding these dispensations. Furthermore, the rescript reasserts that what was already stated in Traditionis Custodes, that the DDW exercises the authority of the Holy See in the above-mentioned cases, supervising the observance of the provisions. This is in line with the analysis I published on Friday. This document clears up the confusion raised by papal critics, including anonymous canonists mentioned in a February 10th article in the Pillar, who argued that Cardinal Roche was not exercising the authority granted to his office by the Pope, but was out over his skis and participating in a violation of natural justice by implementing the Pope's directives in a way that defied their planned meeting. Contrary to the arguments put forth by many papal critics, the document confirms that the authority of the DDW regarding these matters was stipulated in Article 7 of the Motu Proprio Traditionis Custodes. This is in line with the statements of Cardinal Roche in his responsa ad dubia on December 21, 2021, as well as multiple letters from his dicastery to individual bishops. It reasserts that the DDW exercises authority of the Holy See in the above-mentioned cases, supervising the observance of the provisions. The Pillar's editors and others who opposed the Pope's initiative centered their arguments around the notion that the responsa did not represent an authoritative interpretation of Traditionis Custodes, despite having explicit papal assent. Oh boy, gosh, it's like, wow. But what do you even say to that kind of argumentation? The rescript rebuts this thesis, stating that the Holy Father confirms having already expressed his assent in the audience November 18, 2021, what was established in the responsa ad dubia with the attached explanatory notes on December 14, 2021. This kind of overly legalistic pushback is just amazing to me. It's like you didn't put a dot right above the I here. Come on, it's clearly the authority of the Pope that is backing this, for better or worse. The document concludes with the Pope's order that the rescript be published in L'Osservatore Romano, the official Vatican newspaper, and is the official commentary of the Acta Apostolica Sedis as an official act of the Apostolic See. The new rescript seems to settle this matter, but those seeking to undermine Pope Francis are always looking for new loopholes. True, that's true. Again, that being said, is this the best way to move forward? I don't know. And again, ultimately, it's up to the Holy Father to discern these things. So I certainly recognize his authority, and but I do think that we, Canon 212, are able to offer some concerns here. And I just want to say, one of my concerns is there not a better way to handle this, to take care of the legitimate problem without punishing people who don't deserve to be punished? And I know that's not the intention of the Holy Father. It's just but they're caught in the crosshairs, unfortunately. Um, and it's certainly not fair to them. So maybe there's a better way to handle this. I do think what's important, however, is that we show Pope Francis that he is wrong and not right. Show him he's wrong insofar as people weaponizing the Missal of 62. Technically, he's right. He's right. But what I'm saying is, how about people change their approach, stop weaponizing the Missal of 62, and maybe he'll back off and say, okay, maybe we can start to have the Missal of 62 in use more frequently and in a wider spread availability if it's not being weaponized. So what I'm saying is, if you disagree with Pope Francis, prove him wrong. Don't prove him right. Don't use this as an instance to start dissenting against the Holy See, to start trashing the Pope, bashing him, blasting him, saying the worst possible things about him, starting to go against his authority. Those are all going to confirm that what he's saying is true. So how about for people who disagree with this, prove him wrong. Don't weaponize the Missal of 62. Say, Holy Father, we submit to you, even if we have concerns and we can express those concerns. Holy Father, at the end of the day, we're going to submit to you. At the end of the day, I had to make a decision. Am I going to enjoy this really, 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 really nice Eastern Orthodox liturgy that I have at the expense of Catholic communion? Or am I going to have to make some tough decisions and be in communion with Rome, and maybe I won't be able to have that liturgy any longer? I had to make that tough decision. And at the end of the day, a preference for a particular liturgical expression takes the back seat to Catholic communion. Catholic communion is first. Liturgical preferences comes after that, not first. And what some people are doing is they're placing liturgical preferences at the forefront, even over communion with the Holy See. They'll say, you know what, we're going to start having clandestine masses without the authority of the local bishop, without the authority of the Pope. We're even going to go to non-Catholic places. And we're going to do these things, completely rejecting the authority of the Holy Father on this matter. So what you're having is people who are sacrificing Catholic communion and an essential part of ecclesiology for a liturgical preference. And they're making that liturgical preference sacred tradition itself, placing it at the forefront and putting it in priority even over Catholic communion. And what I want to say is we got things backwards. We need to place Catholic communion first because that is sacred tradition. And preferences for a particular liturgy is not synonymous with sacred tradition. That's something we can be a little bit more flexible on. Let's first of all remain in communion, be obedient to the Holy Father because he does have authority over here. So we don't have the authority to dissent from him. We can express our concerns. We can offer some constructive criticism, Canon 212, but we cannot start to oppose him, bash him, dissent from him, start to have masses out of communion with him, as if preserving Catholic communion is something less important than a liturgical preference. So those are my thoughts. Again, I'm going to have Mike Lewis on Friday evening, probably 6 p.m. Central. So stay tuned for that. And I'm going to get his commentary and, again, insider perspective on this, since it was he who contacted Roche on the matter. All right. I hope y'all enjoyed this. As I said at the beginning of the show, hit the subscribe button and hit that like button too. But especially the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications so you know when I go live. And also, if you really appreciate this content and you want to support what I'm doing and you want to get access to extra exclusive content, patreon.com/reason and theology. Okay, y'all, that is going to do it. I will see you later.
If you're looking to buy or sell a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, you're going to want to call Real Estate for Life, and they're going to connect you with a Catholic agent Now that agent will donate a portion of their commission upon sale, and Real Estate for Life will donate 75% of that gift to a pro-life organization at no cost to you. Call Real Estate for Life at 1-877-LIFE-US1 or text them 248-431-1440. If you care about the pro-life cause, call them now.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button. God bless. Are you confused about how Catholic teaching authority works? With encyclicals, papal bulls, councils, and many other things, it's easy to get confused on what is authoritative and what is not. Fortunately, at MaximusInstitute.com, I have prepared a course explaining the magisterium from A to Z. Visit the website and check out the course Understanding the Magisterium for more information.